Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. All right, everybody, time to shut down all those Zoom meetings and conference calls and get in the car and get back to the office. That's what more and more employers and more government officials are saying these days. But is it the right way to go? It's a debate that has been going on for years and years. As a matter of fact, the debate really predates COVID and the pandemic and the way things were happening then. But the poo-poo at the time that employers would always say is, no, we can't have remote work because you know what's going to happen. People are just going to slack off. They're going to be watching television or whatever else they want to do. And productivity is going to go way down. So it was something that was discussed, but never really seriously. Then came COVID, of course, and we don't need to go into all the gory details about what happened during the pandemic. But one of the realities is that many businesses, out of necessity, had to move to remote work. And it was difficult. You know, I remember in our own situation here, but I mean, it was offices all over the place, whether you're selling insurance or doing radio or whatever the case might be. All of a sudden, we were forced into this situation. You don't want to shut business down. You don't want to shut the office down. So we learned rather quickly that remote work was doable. And it took a little bit of time to get the equipment to go in, and more importantly, I guess, for the employees to get used to the equipment, but it was working. We did have the conference calls, and we did have the marketing meetings that went on, and the Zoom meetings that were going on, and it worked. Now, it can be argued how efficient it was, but the studies that I've seen, and we talked about this while this was happening, as a matter of fact, is a lot of people were quite surprised by the fact that productivity didn't go down during remote work. And, as a matter of fact, in many instances, it increased, because workers were happier. I want to get into that in a little more detail in just a couple of minutes. See, where this is all coming from now, long after the pandemic, is that I think a lot of employers, including government employers, are looking at this and saying, look, it's time to get back to the office right now. And the latest was Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who was talking about this just a couple of days ago. He was actually applauding the city of Ottawa, which their council made a decision that employees have to go back to work 5 days a week in the office. And they're going to start that in the new year. And federal employees have kind of done a hybrid here. I think it's 3 days of the week that they need to be in the office. And with management types, I think it's 4 days of the week. But they seem to try to find a balance here because they saw that, there was some benefit to still having remote work. The Ford government here in Ontario, probably thinking that they want to follow the Ottawa lead and the lead of other cities, too. I know Brampton's Mayor Patrick Brown has said that he wants to mandate workers back into the office place as well, and in the next little while. And it seems to be happening not just, of course, in government offices, but in businesses as well. And I'm a little, maybe not skeptical, but I think we need to have a fulsome discussion about this, about what the motivation is for this, for everybody having to get back to work. One of the reasons that I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about, but I think is part of this decision and part of the reality here, is when we were forced through the pandemic for remote work, we saw empty office buildings, downtown cities in Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, you name it. Huge office towers that were either built or are being leased, whatever the case might be, by some of these companies or by the governments themselves. And, under the premise of, okay, we need this much space, this much office space, this many offices because of the X number of employees. So, leases were signed, buildings were constructed, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, of course, during the pandemic, we were forced to do the remote work, as we said. Now, many of those office spaces are empty. And those employers, including the government of Ontario and the government of Canada, for that matter, are probably paying for office space that sits there empty. Well, that's not efficient, is it? So they're simply saying, look, we're paying for this. We may as well get our money back. It's time to bring everybody back in. And they don't say that, but I mean, let's not be naive about this. That's one of the realities here that I'm sure is a factor in the decision to try to get people back into the office space. But they don't say that. I mean, they'll kind of candy coat it into other things like, oh, it's more collegial. It's great to have people and be around other people during a work time. And, the discussions around the water cooler, dragging out that old cliche once again. And I'm not so sure if that's a legitimate reason or it's just them trying to rationalize what they really want to do here and try to make excuses for it. And listen, I'm all for human involvement. I mean, The workplace environment can be very healthy, and it can be very unhealthy in many circumstances as well. For everybody that says, yeah, I'd rather be around people through the course of the day and be able to chit chat when we want and know there's somebody just on the other side of the office here and the next door, that can be good. But there are other people that find workplaces toxic for a whole lot of reasons. The gossip that goes on, the showmanship that happens in some employee relationships, the caste system that goes on. If a boss that doesn't like you or an employee that you don't like and you don't get along with, it can be a very toxic situation. Those exist. And I'm not so sure that's going to be a paramount reason for making a decision on this. But the other element, too, that I wanted to talk about here is what about the employees themselves? In other words, I hear the arguments. I'm not saying I agree with the arguments that the employers, the office space owners are making these days because they want to try to maximize their investment. And they're simply saying we're paying for office space we don't need. Mind you, there are other people that have suggested, well, hey, here's an idea. There's a housing crisis right now. Why don't you use some of that empty office space for residential properties? I'm not hearing much in the way of uptake from some of the businesses or some of the people that own those buildings. Maybe that's something we should be exploring a little bit more. But we'll set that aside for just a second. The other element here is what about the cost of going back to work? The cost to the employee. It's one thing to talk about the cost that the employer has about renting the space and heating it and all that sort of stuff. But what about the employees themselves? The cost of going to work. And one of them is going to be the commute, which a lot of us don't do as much anymore, some not at all now because of remote work. But there's a cost to that. And let's face it, there's the problem that we have about our location as opposed to, where the office may well be. If you work, for instance, for the government of Ontario or the government of Ottawa, or of Canada rather, or any office like that, invariably the offices are usually in city cores of whatever city in which they're located. Most of us don't live down there for a variety of reasons. We'll get into the housing situation, the housing crisis and affordability, etc. And as a result, many of us are forced to move some distance away from where we actually worked. Drive till you can afford a mortgage. That was what it came down to. There are lots of people who work, for instance, in downtown Toronto pre-pandemic that ended up having to buy houses somewhere down the 401. I mean, it used to be Mississauga, then it became Brampton, and then Oakville, and then it became Brantford, and then it became Cambridge, and you get the gist here. And it's like this in just about every city. People have had to move away from their workplace to be able to afford the house that they're living in. Well, if this mandate goes through, those people are going to have to get in their car and drive that distance. That's going to take a lot of money. I mean, the price of gasoline is a lot more than it was 5 years ago. That's part of the commute. And that's going to be a cost to the employee. And I don't hear anybody saying, oh, don't worry about it. We'll cover that for you. They're not going to say that. I know there are people and there are businesses that will allow a gas allowance for some employees, but most of them don't. So let's face that reality. So there's an increased cost to the employee right off the bat. The other element of this, of course, which is the cost to the employee in the way of time. If they're moved far away from home, from the office to the home, if that distance is greater than it should be. I mean, that's the element of time. I mean, I know people, I did in my experience, this is long before COVID, you're talking about workplace concerns or working remotely, because in the early days of my career, there was no remote. It was logistically impossible to be able to do that. And I had to drive considerable distance. It was about an hour and a half commute sometimes. So that's 3 hours out of my day. And that's a good day. It's an hour and a half if it's a good day for traffic. If it's a bad day for traffic, and we've all experienced those, then all of a sudden you could be looking at 3-4 hours on the road. That's, first of all, not productive. It's very stressful for the person that's doing the commute. And that's only going to add to the problem that employee is going to face. Stress can be a factor in getting sick more often, which means more sick days. Is that going to affect productivity? Quite likely it will. So there's that element to it. And I think it's an important part of what we're talking about here. Time is valuable to all of us, whether you're an employee, whether you're the boss, whether you're anything else. And the pressure that we're under during that time can be a major factor in how productive we're going to be. I don't know that they've taken that into account. The other element, of course, is the technology itself. We're more technologically advanced than we were even 5 years ago. I know some people never got used to it, never got the hang of Zoom meetings or the other sorts of technologies that can be used to afford meetings in the workplace. A lot of us have, and it's more productive. It's a lot less costly, even for the employee, to have a Zoom meeting than for everybody to drive downtown, park their car. If you live in a city core, you don't park for free anywhere. So there's that cost as well. Get everybody into the conference room. You have your meeting 2-3 hours, whatever it's going. Then they have to go back into their environments or back to their cars and go back to where they were coming from. That's a cost to the employee and to the employer. That cost doesn't exist right now with remote working. So it's something to factor into. I guess the point here is that this is not a simple, hey, everybody back to work and we'll all live happily ever after. A lot of us are used to it. A lot of us are more productive than we were working remotely than we were working in an office space. Do you really want to just throw that out for whatever reason? Or do we look at this as the new reality? And employees and employers are going to have to understand that we've moved forward. Okay, the technology has allowed us to do this. The reason why it happened is terrible because of the pandemic, but it's where we are right now. So before employees, whether they're government offices or private sector, start forcing people back into the workplace, you got to ask yourself, is it really the most cost-effective way to do it? Are we doing this simply because we're concerned about our costs? What about the cost of the employees? There's a whole series of other problems that can result as we simply move back to this. The old adage is that you shouldn't be looking in the rearview mirror. Yeah, that's the way we did business for the longest time. But any business executive and certainly any business advisor will tell you that if your reason or your excuse for doing things is, well, we've always done it that way, then you're not going to be in business or you're not going to be successful for very long. Take advantage of the technologies that are available. And right now, working remotely does work for an awful lot of people. It makes them healthier. It makes them happier, and happier, healthy employees are more productive employees. So that's the counter argument to this. And I'm not sure too many people are talking about that right now. They're more concerned about their bottom line, that we're paying for office space. Well, that's on you. That was a decision that you as an employer made. And you may have to live with that. But to force people back into work and to force them into situations that may not make them the most productive is not really the solution. It may be the short-term answer, but it could have long-term negative implications. Anyway, good point for discussion. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for watching. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit that notification bell. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, okay? We have so many folks coming on board and talk to us about the things that we talk about here on the podcast, and that's great. We really do appreciate that. But for us to continue that work and to expand the work, well, we need your support, and that's why that subscribe button is so important. Please consider that, okay? Thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing this one. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.